Today we've got a really interesting talk by Dr. Alex Aregbesola. Alex works with us over at CHI. He's a clinical epidemiologist there, works in the clinical trials platform. He's been with CHI now for about 7 months. And he's going to talk to you today about converting clinical experience into good research questions. A little background on Alex. Alex is a medically trained foreign physician coming from Nigeria. He earned a master's degree in epidemiology and also a PhD in epidemiology, and he's got a master's degree in public health from Finland. And he's come to Canada in 2017 and we've been very fortunate to have him over in the clinical trials platform. His primary research interests are in clinical epidemiology, as you guessed, using different study designs to investigate chronic disease and health-related issues. So I will turn the microphone over to Alex and enjoy your talk. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you. I request everyone to sign the sheet. I see letters and the number of people. Extra members here, if you need a certificate. The certificate.
Yeah, Thank you. Yes. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. I'm very happy to present this topic. I've got lots of clinical experience while practicing, and some of those have been turned into research questions and into publications, and I feel that you might benefit from some of those things. Basically, it might look as if it's all about the clinical experience, but it applies to other settings too. What we want to do is to look at those experience people have had, whether in the clinic, study sites, research centers, and that are actually lying fallow, that are not being turned into something that can be useful. And that is the whole essence of this presentation. Why clinical experience? It's gold mine. If you try to search through any of the databases, Embase, PubMed, and look at studies which have been published related to one clinical event or the other, you see hundreds of thousands of those. And the video I wanted to play was to show us how hopefully it works again. I want you to actually see this, and I'll be asking a few questions and tell me what you think.
Tonight, we get rare access inside one APS in Fort Worth. Who are these people? How do they cope when they often deal with the worst that the world has to offer? Average 312 times a day. Only way to find out, go inside. Afternoon, a badly injured woman has come through. Yes. Level 1. But fast. In an instant, the trauma bay fills with looks, and it does feel chaotic, but this is well choreographed. Senior veteran trauma nurse Hunter Langley is point person for communication in the room with the patient herself. In those first few critical seconds, a primary RN will find access points for IVs and blood. There's a respiratory specialist inside, technicians, radiology, residents. Trauma medical director Raj Gandhi is overseeing the big picture. I got a 20-hour. The faces behind those masks in this room are those of moms, dads, sisters, brothers. But those are sensitivities that they all agree must be left outside the doors of trauma, do what they do inside.
You experience stuff here with coworkers that family has no idea about. They don't fully realize that the things that you go through, the things that you see.
2 minutes since the patient was brought in. Still can't stop the bleeding. She is in and out of consciousness. Exactly 4 minutes in, Dr. Gandhi reaches for the black phone. Direct link to the OR. Seconds, the team is breathing.
We're going to be taking her straight to the operating room, OR 9.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to stop it now. But what, if I may ask, is there anything that strike you at all in this short clip? Anything at all? Please, let's make it a bit interactive. Anything that's actually from this clip? Anything struck you? Organization. Okay. Any other thing? Collaboration. Okay. Did you notice any problem at all in this clip? Any problem at all? The patient was brought in, and 2 minutes after, he was actually hemorrhaging. He was losing blood. And 2 minutes after, they couldn't still stop the bleeding. And that was a team. And they were, like you said, they were all working together to achieve a goal, to save a life. Now, my question is, don't you think that these people got experience? This is what they see. The guy that introduced this clip said that on the average, they see about 213 per day. 213 per day of something similar. So now, if we look at that, if that's what they see per day, we multiply it by 365 days. So you can imagine then the number of people coming together to work to achieve a single goal. It tells us how much experience people working in the health sector, how much experience they have, and how much those experience can be turned into data that can be used to improve quality of life, can be used to improve policy guidelines and recommendations. I hope, and I paused when I saw this, and I asked myself that, okay, if this person was brought in, and two minutes after they couldn't stop the blood, the latter part of this clip said something that the surgeon in charge said that sometimes that in a week they lose about 3 patients in a week. So where am I going? What I'm trying to say is that these experiences are so important in turning into data that can be used to improve the quality of life. And this experience can come from any of the team, from either the physicians, the nurses, even the patient. That's the reason why I decided to show that clip. That it's a wealth of data coming out from hospitals, from clinics, from research centers, and so on. Now, the other thing I want to talk about today is this experience can be bidirectional. It can either come from the practicing physician, from the health provider. It can also come from the patient. But the main goal here is that how do we derive questions, researchable questions from this experience that can be used to improve the quality of life? I like to get back to my slide. Okay. So this experience, like we said, can be good, it can be bad. A very good example is this scenario which I painted, put up here. During the pandemic, 2020, 19, when the H1N influenza virus was all over the world. People were being vaccinated. And at that time, health providers began to see cases of neurological diseases, encephalitis, and the likes. And at that time, when patients were presenting it at the hospital, there was something consistent, and that was that shortly before the condition started, they were vaccinated. So that arose a question that could it be that the vaccine that was given was responsible for the encephalitis that these people are presenting with? Now, not going far away from what we are trying to talk about, that the experience that we can turn into research question. That experience was turned into a research question by these guys in Belgium. When they saw a case of a patient who presented was vaccinated for H1N1 influenza, and they presented with all kinds of neurological problems, and they investigated further. They gave treatment, and it still remained at the vegetative state. Then that prompted something that, okay, there seems to be a problem here. Then they went back to check all those people that actually had presented with encephalitis to see if they also had been exposed to vaccine. What I'm trying to say is that there are ways in which things happen in clinical settings that can actually stimulate research questions. And these things can come from, they can be good, they can be bad, they can be common, they can be uncommon. It's just that anyone working in those places just need to have an open mind to be able to pick some of these things. And that's what we want to talk about, how to actually identify those questions and how to consider them, whether they are good enough to investigate or not. I made this model, which I feel it will help anyone. It has helped me in some of the studies which I've been part of from the experience which I've had in clinical setting. And this model, it's like events, experience, they can come from anywhere. Mind you, this experience, events are not restricted to the clinic, like I said. It can also happen at research centers. They can happen at the departments. It just has to be clinically oriented. Now, whatever the experience you have, whatever the experience or whatever the problem you perceive in wherever you have to actually scrutinize this against 3 questions. And what are these questions? Does this problem provide new knowledge for this problem that I'm seeing? And am I familiar with it? You need to ask it, whatever the question, whatever the problem that you might have identified, it must answer that. Does it provide a new knowledge? And is the new knowledge in area that I am familiar with? And I will explain that. You want to do a research that is cutting edge. You want to bring up a question that people would say, well, that's question. People won't say, oh, that question is undoable, because not all questions can be answered. That's just the truth. So you want to ask, okay, is it possible for me to conduct this research question from the problem that I have identified? And how to be able to arrive at that is to ask that, do I have enough knowledge in that area? I'm going to give a few examples. Let's take, for example, in diagnosis. There are different, let's say in diagnosis of pneumonia, tuberculosis. There are laboratory diagnoses. Now, maybe you identify a problem, but for you to be able to turn that problem or that event into a question, you need to at least know where is the boundary. What is it that we know? What do you know about that? Because it's not enough for you to identify, okay, I'm in a research center, or I'm in a place. I think there's a problem here. Because there's a problem or something has been wonderfully done doesn't necessarily translate into a research question. You need to first of all ask yourself that, do I have the knowledge enough to know where the existing knowledge stops? That you have to ask yourself. Then once you can identify that boundary, then you can now fit in what you have identified. Okay, is it going to take the knowledge further from where it stopped? If it doesn't, then it doesn't qualify to be researchable. So what am I saying is that there must be a background knowledge of what you think you have identified. So if I've identified a problem, let's say in diagnosis of, I'm trying to think of a very nice example now that can cut across. Let's say in the care of bedridden patients, if I've identified maybe the way the beddings are being changed, the way the patients are being turned, the question is, do I have enough knowledge about the care of a bedridden patient? So you identify the problem, then you run it against that. So once you are able to find, okay, up to the time, there is a knowledge up to this level. So where does this fit in? It fits into this, then it qualifies. That is number one question. Then the number two is, is it an answerable question? Because not all problem can be measured. Okay, I'll give an example. You want to check dietary pattern in homeless people. Okay, you want to check, okay, what's the dietary pattern in homeless people? One, these people are homeless. You can't actually get them. They are moving from one place to other. So how do you answer that question? What I'm saying is that the question has to be the one that can be answered. You have to actually test it, whether what I'm interested in, the problem that I've identified, can it be measured? Can it be assessed? Can it be evaluated? Because if you can't do that objectively, then it's not worth researching on. Then another question which you need to run whatever problem or whatever thing or event you have identified is to check if it actually improves the existing guidelines, the existing, well, people may say existing knowledge, but I will put it existing guideline, because in clinical practice, in research, in whatever it is, there is an existing knowledge. So you want to check, okay, based on the existing knowledge, is this going to improve the problem that I've identified, or the experience that I have, that I think we can conduct a research on to take the knowledge further? Is it going to improve the existing guideline? Going back to the model, I actually identify a few. This is the Canadian stroke best practice recommendation as of 2015, which was updated. There is something about the stroke, for example. Unfortunately, we are talking about clinical experience here. So some of my experience, of course, examples are going to be related to clinical experience. Stroke, management involves it's multifaceted. Rehabilitation is one part of management of stroke. Now, in 2015, there was an updated recommendation. And what was identified? A group of people who have been involved, like nurses, even those working in the rehabilitation, they noticed that, okay, some things are not working in the present guideline of the rehabilitation of stroke patient. And some inclusions were made. First, they found out that the patients, the person who has suffered stroke, the inputs from those people are not considered. We have heard about the patient-oriented research that is everywhere now. They discovered that, okay, the inputs of the patient, the inputs of the person who has suffered this stroke is not actually evaluated to ask, okay, what exactly is it that you would love to be assessed when we are rehabilitating you? They found that that was lacking. Then when these people fall, because when people suffer stroke, they have all kinds of neurological problems. They have problems with speech, problems with walking, problems with sight, hearing. I'm sure most of us, we are aware, we know someone or we've heard of someone who has suffered stroke at one time or the other. All kinds of problems they go through. Now, this guideline is a good example of how people can identify problems from their research, from their clinical experience. Now, this is in the rehabilitation. And they found out that, okay, these people's input is not, they are not involved in the guidelines. So that was introduced in 2015. Then research also showed that intensity of therapy, of rehabilitation therapy, gives best outcome during the first 24 hours. Some people identify that, okay, because the rehabilitation it spans from weeks to months, some people it might linger to years. But what is critical is what is done within the 24 hours. That was identified by people who were involved in the care, in the rehabilitation of the stroke patient. And that has been added into the guideline. Experience from their practice showing that if the intensity of the stroke patient or of rehabilitation is low during the first 24 hours, it later on affects the outcome. That was picked by those people who were working on it. And then that research was done. A lot of meta-analysis were done, and they put that together, and it was added into the guideline. So this is one example in which we can turn the clinical experience even into improving guideline. But like I said earlier, enough knowledge about rehabilitation of stroke had to come into place. Because before this was added into the guideline, a lot of studies were conducted in different places against the backdrop of the existing knowledge. And that was put together and added into Canadian stroke rehabilitation guideline. One other thing that was added into this was that they found out that, okay, stroke happens in almost cuts across all ages. Now you see it in newborn, neonate, infants, for all kinds of diseases that can be responsible for it. And that was lagging. It was lagging. It wasn't in the rehabilitation of children was not included in the guideline. So noticing that, they put a research together, and that was added into it. So these are some of the ways in which we can turn the experience we have, or we notice, might not be a clinician, it might be someone who is working in that place, noticing that, okay, there is a problem in here, and then that problem is run against background knowledge and existing guideline to see if there is a loophole, and then research is conducted to be able to fill that loophole. Another example is this issue of Clozapine. Clozapine is a drug that is used for schizophrenia. It's when it's an antipsychotic drug. It's atypical, the second generation antipsychotic drug. But physicians, we are a bit reluctant to prescribing Clozapine because of side effects. It's got a lot of extrapyramidal side effects. But the issue is that for people who are psychotic, who have suicidal risk, it's a very good drug. Now, people noticed that physicians don't prescribe it. Okay, like I was saying now, that identifying this problem doesn't have to be a clinician or a health provider. Even it might be those who those who dispense the drugs. They discovered that these drugs were not prescribed for patients. So some people came together and then they tried to evaluate what is the reason why, despite the fact that it is a known drug and it's known to be very effective, why is it not regularly prescribed by physician, apart from the fact that it's got lots of side effects, but it's very effective. So they came up with to study what is the prescription trend in different countries. And then they were able to arrive at reasons why this, apart from the side effect that it has, okay, and it was turned into a research question, which is the whole essence of what we are talking about here, that experience can come from anywhere, but as long as it's clinically related and it's hard to existing guideline, it's worth researching. This is another example of healthcare providers' perception of family presence during pediatric resuscitation. That's another example. I wouldn't want to bore us about that. This was also another example of the one that we did in a study we did in one hospital in Abuja. Some midwives still believe that paternal presence during childbirth is not good, does not help the birth outcome. Okay? I am trying to give some of these scenarios to see simulators for those who are into health, who are health providers, or you are involved in one kind of clinical work or the other, that the experience can come from at any time. So they were like, okay, some midwives felt that no, their presence has been a distraction. While some actually believe that it helps the quality of birth outcome. So we decided we did this study in the hospital. We went to check what was the existing guideline of giving birth. Okay, we noticed the idea, the problem, then we checked it against the existing knowledge for that particular location, for that place. We are going to come to that. What was the existing knowledge? We did that. We found out, okay, there was a problem that this has not been included in the guideline. Okay, so we conducted a study, and then we came up with an outcome that it actually improves the quality of that outcome, and that has continued to generate. In fact, till today, is generating, debates whether to add it into the guideline of the midwives in Nigeria. So that's another example. Now, the main consideration in developing a good research questions. So these are the main considerations which I'm going to share with you. The basic dimension of a clinical problem you need to know. When I talk about basic dimension, what do I mean? Once you identify a particular situation, an event, let's say you are working at a research center, you are working at a laboratory unit, you are working at in the department, you notice a clinically oriented problem. The question you should ask yourself, or you should find out, is, do I have enough knowledge about the biology and physiology of this question, of these things that I've noticed? So you need to run it against the biology, the physiology of the problem. What is the epidemiology? Okay, is it common? What is the prevalence? Is it worth researching on? What are the determinants? What are the determinants? And then what is the distribution? Okay, you run it against I call it basic dimension of clinical problems. The biology, the physiology, and importantly, the epidemiology. The epidemiology has to do with, is it common enough? Is it prevalent enough? What is the incidence rate of this? If it is high, then it is worth researching. Otherwise, it can be frustrating if you start to do a research in which to get participants, you will spend lots and lots of money, or you will need to involve. It will take years for you to get participants to conduct the study. So it's not enough to know or to perceive or identify the question, but you need to run the question to find if you have against the basic dimensions, the biology, the physiology, and more importantly, the epidemiology of the question, which has to do with the determinant, the prevalence, the incidence, and the distribution of that event or problem you have noticed in that particular area. Going back to the model which I mentioned the other time, at this stage now, after you have actually run the question against those three basic questions I talked about, you start to develop a tentative question from the problem that has been identified. At least you are likely going to be, okay, this thing that I've identified, is it better to include this particular type of people, at this particular period? A tentative question will start to evolve, but still not done. You have to check the appropriate stage of evaluation. Okay, I've identified this problem. Okay, at what stage am I coming in? I'm going to give a good example of this now. When before there was treatment for tuberculosis, people were dying of tuberculosis. Okay. Now, there are different tests for making diagnosis of tuberculosis, apart from chest X-ray, doing a sputum test, and all those stuff. But the question now is, if someone identified a problem at that time, that okay, people were dying because they were exposed to another person who was coughing, and there was no enough knowledge about why are they dying. What I'm saying is that the problem that has been identified is that people have been dying. Why are they dying? So what I have noticed is because perhaps there was no treatment, or perhaps the treatment was not good enough. So perhaps the diagnosis was bad. So these are some of the experience, that one could have picked at that time. But at what point are you coming in? If diagnosis of tuberculosis could not be achieved, then you can't come up with a research question as to how to treat tuberculosis. The same thing applies to any other chronic diseases like hypertension, stroke. If the diagnosis was not made, how then do you come up with a research question to talk about treatment? What I'm saying here is that whatever it is that you have identified, it must be incremental. That is, it must take the knowledge a step forward. It can't move from one end of a spectrum to another end. Okay, so if what you have identified, it's at 0.4 on a scale of 1 to 10, you have identified a problem at 0.6. Okay, if we don't know what is happening at 0.5, 0.4, 0.3, 2, or 1, then you can't do anything about it. So you have to reframe your question to answer what has not been known before that. I don't know whether it makes sense to us. Another point is accuracy of the question. How accurate is the question you have identified, or the problem that you want to turn into a research question? How accurate is it? And when we talk about accuracy, then we talk about validity and precision of the problem. We talk about the validity and precision of the problem. And validity is divided can either be internal or external. I'm interested in a problem. Okay, let's use the stroke rehabilitation as an example. In the guideline, the rehabilitation for children was not well spelled out. Now, I identified the problem. Now, the question is, how valid is that, turning that into a research question? So I have to find out if I can draw a very valid inference if I conduct a research among neonates or infants who have suffered stroke to see if whatever inference that I am able to do or derive from this set of people in a particular place is going to be applicable to another group of people with similar characteristics. If I decide to conduct that research here in the pediatric or neonatal ward here in Manitoba, among, let's say, the age of 5 to 7, if I want to replicate that study in Alberta, is it reproducible? Can I make inference that I get from conducting a study here? Can I make that inference to apply to children in Alberta or in Ontario? So you need to be able to check the validity of the question. That if I go ahead with this question, will it be valid? And when you talk about validity, it means that will I be able to draw an inference that is applicable to the same set of people if conducted in another place? Then the external validity is, how does it apply to people outside that group that I've used? So we need to check that when we are forming a research question from the experience we have had, that okay, we sit down to look at it. Is this question going to be valid? Then is it precise enough to address the experience which I have noticed? Any questions so far? Yeah. The validity which I'm talking about, the internal validity and external validity, it has to do with taking into consideration biases, confounding, selection. If I got to that stage where I'm forming the research question, I have to think, if I form this question this way, am I entertaining any form of bias? Okay. In my selection, am I entertaining any form of bias in the information that I have? We need to run, because this Romanian French playwright said that it's more important to have the right question than getting an answer. Because once you have the right question, you are most likely going to get the right answer. So taking time to forming the right question. Once the question is correct and appropriate and can be scrutinized against these points, you are likely going to carry out a very good research, which is going to make an impact from the experience that you have noticed wherever you work or whatever you do. Then another point which we need to assess is how visible is the study design which I'm going to use to carry out such questions. You come up with an idea of, okay, let's use the homeless people again as an example. You come up with a study in which you want to check the dietary pattern of homeless people over 4 years or 3 years. Let's put it that way. What study design are you going to use to do that? How visible are you going to be able to get someone who is homeless to study the dietary pattern? So, taking into consideration the study design, and that's why I sincerely think that once we have an experience which we want to turn into a research question, we need the input of others in the in the others involved in methodology. Okay, because they easily, an epidemiologist will readily tell you, oh no, this question is a good problem, but you need this kind of study design to be able to carry this out, this problem you have identified. So involving an epidemiologist or a methodologist at the early stage, as early as forming the research question, would help you to carry out, to arrive at a researchable question, which will lead you to a good result. You form a question which can only be carried out. Okay, you have a question? No, okay. Yeah. So you form a question in which you can only do retrospectively. Okay, you notice a problem. Let's say you notice a problem at the clinic. This has happened, and you're going to do a retrospective study. Now, the way you frame your question has to fit into that study design to make it feasible. So if you're not taking anything, what I'm saying is that at the level of forming the research question, you need to involve a methodologist. Okay, to be able to form a researchable question or run it through so that at least what you have identified as an experience which you want to turn into a research question can appropriately be checked for visibility and appropriate study design. Then there should be a synergy between question and visibility. That's also, I think I've explained that. And also affordability, what you have available to you from that research question, or from the experience which you want to turn into research question, the funding available to you. Do I have the skill, like I just said now? If I'm forming a research question, and do I have enough skilled personnel? What study site will I carry out this research question? How am I going to collect the data? How am I going to store the data? How am I going to analyze the data? These things have to be checked at the level of forming your question. Otherwise, you will run into problem at some stage, at a point during carrying out. And you would save a lot of time and will produce more if at the level of forming the question, we are able to cross-check all these points. I ask this question: how accurate are research questions described? How accurate are they from clinical experience? That is, from an experience that someone has had, how accurate are the questions which have come out of it? How accurate do they address the problem? All those things can actually be evaluated if these points are taken into consideration. Because there is no research that is devoid of error. But the point is that there are some errors which are random, they just occur, and some are systematic. When they are systematic, they become a bias, and they affect the validity of your question, of your research question, and then the result that comes out of it. So, and that's why we need to run the whatever experience we've had that we want to turn into research question against these points. Still going back to my model again. After we've been able to identify, screen the tentative question through these 6 questions which I mentioned, then we need to identify pickup from the research question that we have. And what is pickup? Yeah. Pickup stands for patients or participants. So once you form the question, ask yourself, can I identify this from the question I have? Is my question targeting can I identify this from my question? Can my question answer this? The participant that I'm interested in, or patient, as the case may be. What intervention do I want to carry out? What is it that I want to do, okay, to improve on the existing knowledge? And which group am I comparing it with? Okay, and what is the outcome? What am I looking for? And in which period do I want to carry it out? Because what you get may be time dependent. Okay, you carry out the research at, okay, good example is checking the, okay, there was an hypothesis that during the summer months, people tend to have lower incidence of flu-like symptoms only, okay, compared to the winter period. Some people came up with that okay, notice that we see less of flu-like symptoms during the summer. They decided to run that against background knowledge. Is there anything with summer that has to do with, that affects flu or flu-like symptoms? Then literature showed that, okay, there seems to be a lot of vitamin D in people's system. There's a lot of algal activity during summer months. So the concentration of vitamin D in the body goes up. Now, what does vitamin D have to do with flu-like symptoms? You see how this applies to what we have talked about the other time. You now find out that, okay, once the level of vitamin D gets to a particular concentration, it actually improves the immunity of the body against virus infection. Now, imagine someone carrying out this study also during the winter months. So that's why the period when you carry out the study is also very important. So arriving at your question, if your question is able to answer this, if you can identify this from your question, you are most likely heading on the right path. So still coming back to my final, the model. So at this point, you are likely to have arrived at least a workable research question. And then the cycle continues again. I did a quick search in the Embase to see how many studies that are guideline related, that have been born out of people's experience, either clinical or non-clinical, and over 200,000 studies. It shows how much we can turn the experience we have, or we've had, or we're going to have, into usable data to improve whatever it is we are aiming for. Yeah. Thank you. I don't know if there are any questions or anything that we want to. It's a short presentation, but trust me, it's going to help a lot in forming your research question if you can follow this model. Simple, but yet very effective. I've used it and it has worked. Any question from anyone? Right? It means either my presentation was like, it was very clear. Which is it?
On your last slide,
Okay.
it said that I think that there were approximately 200 guideline-related studies.
Yeah.
You didn't comment on that.
Oh,
Does that
yes.
strike you as?
Yeah. Actually, when I saw this, what came to my mind was two things. I expected more. Let me put it that way. I expected more. But like I said, this included even collaborations with other institutes, other university. But one thing that it shows that more needs to be done. Okay, that people have got lots of experience that they are not actually turning into research. That's the first thing that came out of that popped up to me. You know, that we got lots and lots of. Then also another thing that also pop up when I saw this was that perhaps that people are not looking beyond their how do I put it now? That there isn't enough collaboration within different units. I mean, across different units. I mean that if let me give you an example. If a technologist notices something, okay, let's say someone working in hematology, he notices a problem, okay, and this problem can be turned into a research question. Now he needs to work with those who are sending this patient, okay, to be able to conduct the research. You understand? So what it means is that people are not collaborating enough. That's pure and simple, and I expect more.
Not all the clinicians.
That's also
Bias.
primary. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. Other question? Thank you so much.